I'm Dennis McCuistion, and on today's program, we're going to give you a unique perspective on the biggest stain on American history, slavery. John Rankin is a name most of us probably don't know, but in his day, he was known as the father of abolitionism. He was a conductor on the Underground Railway, and a recent book entitled The Conductor was written by our guest today, writer, researcher, nonprofit professional, Caleb Franz. Caleb is adept at bringing to light forgotten stories and figures from American history with a particular focus on times before the Civil War. Now, Caleb, I got to tell you, looking at your age, I cannot figure there's someone who's a biographer who, are you out of college yet or not? You just look so young. Who the heck was John Rankin, and why did you decide to write about him?
Yeah, he's not a household name by any means. I grew up in an area that was in southern Ohio, Appalachian Ohio. It felt like history kind of happened elsewhere. You know, you hear about Boston and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., and of course all of those places, it's for good reason. But what I didn't realize until much later was that I had a figure kind of in my backyard because John Rankin died in the town that I grew up in. So as I was starting to kind of put together the idea and the concept for this book, I knew abolitionism kind of in that region was going to be the focal point. And working with the publisher, we kind of agreed that Rankin's story needs to be told properly as a biography. So we went with it, and I'm really happy we did because it provides an opportunity to expose them to a much bigger audience now.
So John Rankin lived basically what years, from when to when, and when was he active on the Underground Railroad?
John Rankin was alive. He was born in 1793. So interestingly enough, when the first Fugitive Slave Act passed the House of Representatives in Congress, that was his birthday on February 4th.
Wow.
So from the very beginning, it was like his life was tethered to this issue of slavery.
It's destiny.
Yeah. It was,
right.
It was providential. And he certainly would have seen it that way too. He lived until the 1880s. He was 93 years old whenever he died, so he lived a long and fruitful life. In spite of constant attacks, and his health was always kind of like at odds as well. So he was constantly pushing through something working towards this bigger fight.
So what pushed him to the anti-slavery position, number one, and then tell us what the Underground Railway was?
Well, it was his faith. Is the short answer, is that he grew up in a Presbyterian household. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he struggled a lot as a boy trying to find his purpose of what he was to do with his life, what he thought that God was calling him to do. And after the death of his brother during the War of 1812, it started to kind of come into picture with this. He was able to go to college then in Washington College, Washington Academy, which is in Eastern Tennessee, or was in Eastern Tennessee. He met his wife there, who was the granddaughter of the president of the college, Samuel Doak. And then from there, they started to build their family, and he started to become a minister. And he felt like this was the issue that he needed to speak out on, because there were a lot of it being from Tennessee and in the South. Slavery was a hot button issue, mm-hmm. And he felt like there were members of the church who were continuing to live in sin without addressing the issue of slavery. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to tackle that, and he did pretty much out the gate whenever he started.
Well, it seems preaching to me that when you're living in an area where slavery is sort of the norm, that taking an opposite perspective, shall we say, probably wasn't that easy. Am I right? I mean, tell me some of the things that happened.
It wasn't a welcome perspective. He was essentially told that, like, you know, we understand that you have these thoughts and we understand that you have these positions, but if you're going to continue to preach about slavery, it's best if you go elsewhere.
Somewhere where there's not slavery?
Somewhere north, essentially. Eventually he did do that. It was pretty quickly into his ministry in 1817 that he got all of his belongings. He had barely a 1-year-old son at that point. And then they hopped on the wagon and started their journey north to Ohio. And in Ripley, Ohio is where they would end up, and that's where the bulk of his story really takes place.
All right, so I don't have a map, but what part of Ohio would that be in then?
So Ripley is right on the Ohio River, and it's a small community. It's about as big as it was in Rankin's day. Today you can go there, and his house is still featured. He built his home setting on the hill right behind the village. So it's the only building on the entire hill. So anyone who is escaping slavery, trying to find freedom, could always reliably go and look at his house. He would leave a lantern in the window so it would be easy to identify and easy to find. And he welcomed it. Now on the flip side of that, there were plenty of bounty hunters and people who are not necessarily in favor.
So this is where the slaves who are runaway slaves are going to be, and so we just have to watch the house.
That's right. Yeah. So that was they had to be very careful. But he never cowered away from it. He never had second thoughts on it. He truly believed that this was his calling, and he executed it as faithfully as he could.
Okay, and they called it the Underground Railway because?
Well, because it was secretive, thus the underground nature. Whenever they would go through, whenever anyone who's a fugitive would go through a station, so a station like Rankin's home, they would often send them to the next safe house, thus kind of creating a line up eventually to Canada.
Right. Okay, and then maybe the most famous person involved in that was a lady named Harriet Tubman. Did they interact? Did they know each other? What's the situation there?
So Harriet Tubman she was from Maryland, and John Rankin was from southern Tennessee and eventually made his way to Ohio. So there wasn't any evidence of either of them interacting, but he certainly had his fair share of interactions with notable figures throughout the history of the abolitionist movement. I think probably the most notable one is William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison considered himself a disciple of John Rankin's, is what he called himself, and he called Rankin his anti-slavery father. So he was profoundly influential in him. And another one that many people may be very familiar with is another Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Oh, Harriet Beecher Stowe,
and
of course.
she crafted a very pivotal part of Uncle Tom's Cabin, of the character of Eliza crossing the river with a child in her arms. She got that story from John Rankin.
No kidding.
So he has this impact throughout American history that most people would never even consider.
No, but, I say most people never even heard of. So how did you end up picking him? And just because you happen to live in the same area, or what?
Well, that was kind of the outset of it was a process of discovery, certainly, and I to some degree I feel like it was a providential act of coming to him and being able to tell his story. Yeah. But I realized that there hasn't been a biography about John Rankin since he was alive in 1869. There's been one other book that prominently features the story. It's called Beyond the River. I got to connect with the author of that story in the process of writing this book. But by and large, it's very uncommon to come across someone who's heard of John Rankin, and that's what I wanted to help reverse.
Well, give that viewer some idea of some of the things that he went through, some of his more memorable, either positive or negative situations that happened that you write about in the book.
Yeah, so John Rankin's story is dynamic. This is a story that is full of excitement and danger, and I try to write it in a way that reflected that. He was mobbed frequently on both, not just in Kentucky and in Tennessee, but eventually whenever he would cross the river into Ripley and into Ohio. He writes about how he would eventually have to park his horse on the other side of town so it wouldn't get shaved and bobbed. The anti-abolitionist mobs were quite common throughout the Jacksonian Republic, and Rankin was public enemy number one for them in his part of Ohio. He was also the target of assassination attempts, and he had bounties that was put on his head for up to about $3,000, which in 1830s is quite a bit of money. Right. And there was one point where there was even a siege that took place at his home in Ripley, where they had this battle essentially between Rankin and his family and the Kentucky bounty hunters that were trying to cash in on this.
So the bounty hunters were on the other side of the river, but they would cross the river and go after him, because it wasn't like the people in Ohio who were in a non-slavery state. They weren't against him, or were they? Or maybe they were concerned.
Well, you'd be surprised. I think there was a lot of animosity toward the abolitionists and toward the conductors, even in the North, partly because in a river town or a river community like Ripley or nearby Cincinnati, the sympathies often were not always there with John Rankin. They often sided more with the Southern arguments. Either economic arguments were made that they didn't want to compete in a free market with Black Americans. Mm-hmm. There was also, of course, plenty of reason to be concerned about the nature of the Underground Railroad and inviting violence, essentially, and inviting this conflict to their communities. And a lot of people were very angry about that. So there were a lot of reasons that John Rankin had to cause some controversy, even in northern states.
Did he continue to preach throughout this time?
He did, yeah.
And
he
what
was
kind of a
preaching the entire
congregation
time.
did he have? I mean, it's a small town. I mean, did he go to Cincinnati, or what happened there?
No, he was.
How did he make a living, I guess,
Well, not easily.
I mean, I wouldn't think so,
Yeah, he was a pretty humble guy, and he was never really trying to make much, but he was able to make ends meet. His property it doubled as a farm, so he was able to produce a lot of produce in that sense too. And his preaching was very popular, especially as Ripley, the community in Ripley, in spite of the antagonists that he faced surrounding him and surrounding that community, he did have a very strong community that he could rely on, who were also conductors in Ripley.
So it wasn't
just him. But that's one of the reasons why the Ripley line was so popular through the Underground Railroad, is because it was this safe haven for anyone.
So Ohio, looking across the river, the Ohio River, did you say it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Into Kentucky.
Yep.
Right. So how did they get across the river? I mean, was it ferry, swimming, what?
Any way that they could.
There wasn't a bridge there, was there?
Not at that time, no. So sometimes they would try to create rendezvous points. Sometimes, in the case of the Eliza story, where it was just frozen enough where she could just cross it that way. It was challenging. It was not easy, and it had to be, of course, secretive, so it couldn't be in broad daylight. They had to be careful.
So where did these slaves come from? I mean, they all the way far south as Louisiana and beyond, or were they mostly Kentucky, Tennessee, what?
It was mostly nearby, mostly in the bluegrass throughout Kentucky, although there was at least one figure in Ripley who eventually became a conductor himself, had fled slavery and made his way. He was in Louisiana, and he was born in Virginia. His name was John Parker. And he was kind of like a new generation of conductors that helped Rankin throughout the 1840s and 50s. But outside of him, it's mostly confined to Kentucky.
So they didn't just keep the people in Ripley; they shipped them further north to Canada. Did you say?
Yeah. Once they got on the line, his sons would often help them get to the next station, and then eventually the goal was to get to Canada.
To Canada, even though Ohio was a non-slavery state, right?
Right.
And
that
then
didn't really mean too much. Once they left a slave territory or a slave state, it was basically a mad dash from Ohio. They would have to sprint to Canada.
So because there would be bounty hunters after them, basically? Is that the issue?
Yes, because if they were found out and they were caught, then they could be captured and put back into slavery. And oftentimes, if you were captured, you would be sold down south,
right,
into the deep south. And Kentucky was considered, obviously slavery anywhere was bad, but it was considered the more benevolent state as far as slavery went, compared to some of the deeper south, like Louisiana, Alabama.
And so I get my slave back, I'll show him, I'll sell him for more money south. He's got a worse life, I've got more money, there we are.
Once you reach down south, that like any hope of escape was essentially
hard,
gone.
Hard. Well, but you've also sort of drawn some parallels between some of the struggles today. So give us some of your perspective about that.
Yeah, I think I think that John Rankin, so I don't think that there's anything today that really compares to the issue of slavery, and I think that sometimes we like to try to make a comparison, and it really just doesn't compare. Slavery had a death grip on the country and the direction and everything, that every major crisis that happened in the early republic, slavery was often at the heart of it. So it's really hard for us to connect to the issue the way that we sometimes want to try to connect. But I do think in the nature of Rankin's character and in the nature of like what it took, what it required of him to be able to stand on his hilltop, and over 2,000 slaves went through his station,
wow,
which is one of, if not the most populated station on the Underground Railroad. It took a lot of courage and it took a lot of faith, and that is something that I don't think that we fully understand today, because we are very comfortable in our own lives, and what Rankin was doing was anything but.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was a white man. Harriet Tubman was a black woman.
Yes.
The fact that he was a white man, did that create even more consternation with people? I mean, how can you be against the other white people who have slaves? What was that all about?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, there was constant racial tension. Being an abolitionist himself, there was kind of, especially in the early days of abolitionism, there was kind of a caricature of like, these are the kind of kooky radicals, mm-hmm, that have this like, crazy mm-hmm idea of immediate emancipation.
Right.
And that certainly didn't sit well with a lot of his neighbors, which is one of the reasons why he left Tennessee and left the South and went up to Ohio. But it did provide him a little bit more flexibility compared to some of his like black colleagues on the Underground Railroad as well.
So what did he think when Abraham Lincoln was elected and then issued the Emancipation Proclamation?
So Rankin joined the chorus of a lot of abolitionists in that he wanted, from as early as possible, to ensure that the Civil War was a war that was fought against slavery. He saw slavery as the cause of the rebellion. He saw slavery as the cause of the fighting, and he was urging the president and the Republican administration to make that official. Because in his view, if slavery is not dealt with now, then we're going to be right back in the same situation in another 20 years, 15 years, however long it might take. So if we want to prevent this from happening again, then it has to be waged against slavery. And then whenever the Emancipation Proclamation was released and was made official on January 1st in 1863, Rankin was, of course, very happy, but he did not want to lose sight of the end goal because the Emancipation Proclamation only affected those southern states in rebellion. So anywhere that the military pushed forward in the South as they made advancements, then it would go into effect. But where he was looking out over his hilltop home in Kentucky, who was not in rebellion, then it didn't do anything.
Still got the same problem. Still got the people getting to get there.
So the fight needed to continue in his mind until slavery was completely abolished, which eventually, of course, did happen with the 13th Amendment.
Yeah. So is there anything in your book that dealt with how he felt after President Lincoln's assassination?
There's a little bit, yes. So he did offer, essentially, Ripley went into a state of mourning, essentially an official state of mourning, and he did offer the prayer during that. It's limited as far as we don't have any of his writings that I'm aware of, as far as what he thought after Lincoln was shot, but he was mournful, and he was, of course, very upset with the rest of his country.
What do you want the reader of this book to take away from what you've done here?
Well, I think that Rankin's profile needs to be elevated. I think that Rankin is one of the great American heroes that, for whatever reason, has been lost to history. And I think that needs corrected. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. But also, I think that there is a theme throughout the story that, history doesn't just happen in those major places throughout the country. It's not just Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York, and so on and so forth. Sometimes the most important things that can happen in history will happen in a small community that vast majority of the population has never heard of or never even considered a place on the map, but it has substantial impacts on the world that we live in today. So I want that to communicate as well throughout the book.
Well, they just don't have all the media and everything else around, and
right.
the big numbers of people who can find out about it.
Exactly.
For sure. So thank you for doing that. Now, in just a short time that we have left, you work with a group called Young Voices. What is that, and what's your relationship with them?
Yeah, so I'm the program manager for Young Voices. What we do is that we essentially try to help young people who are early in their careers, either in journalism or policy or academia, trying to give them the experience and make the right connections with the right people to help advance their careers as they're trying to go on and do more in this space and try to really make the world a better place.
So who are these folks? College graduates in college? Who are they?
It's 18 to 35, so it's a pretty broad net, but that was intentional because what we find is that a lot of people who leave college, obviously a lot of colleges have a lot of student groups, and then you leave college and you enter into the workforce,
the group. Yeah.
And then you're out at sea without a sail. And we want to be that sail for them.
So is this local, national? What is it?
It's international. So we we accept applications from young people anywhere in the world. Of course, our bread and butter is going to be in the United States, and that is where we put the most emphasis on. But we do have a strong UK presence. We're trying to expand more into Canada. And so on and so forth.
So they have their own careers, and this is an avocation or just a membership group, or what happens?
Yeah, they apply to get into our programming. It's completely free, but once we accept them, they continue to work on their careers, and we will help them get published in mainstream media outlets across the country or across the world. And then that helps build their credentials. and introduce them to a broader network of like-minded individuals.
All right, so when you say publish then, are these primarily folks who've gone to journalism school as an example, or what?
Some of them are, yeah, but some of them are more policy-oriented. The emphasis is really on the individual, and that's kind of what it makes the program, I think, really special, is that whatever it is that you're working on, within the confines of our mission and our purpose, we help get you to the next step.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have is it a mentor-mentee relationship where you have a one-on-one thing, or is it group meetings, or is it all the above, or how does this work?
It's a little bit of all the above, so it's completely virtual, it's completely remote. You can do it from anywhere in the world, and all you have to do is write one op-ed a month, and then we help you edit the piece, pitch it out for publication, and then by the end of the program, it's about 4 months, you have hopefully 4 pieces under your belt, and you have a huge network to tap into to help advance your career.
Wow. So do you know the newspapers you think would be most likely to publish somebody's op-ed?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. So give us an example about what subjects the op-ed would be on.
It varies. It depends on the contributor that writes them, but we've had plenty of op-eds placed from foreign policy, economic policy. Obviously, inflation has been very topical recently. Tech and AI is something that is becoming more and more topical and important. So the contributor that wants to join our program, they essentially pitch that to us, and then we help refine their arguments and help them get placed.
And then you know sort of what newspapers might pick up something on that subject matter.
That's right. Yeah, we have suggestions, and of course we've built out relationships with a lot of people.
Connect them with think tanks too, or not?
Yes. Yeah. Think tanks as well.
Well, thank you, Caleb, first of all, for writing this and letting us know about John Rankin. Thank you for being here as well. And, I don't know, if you're like me and not truly understanding the purpose of history in my younger days and only figuring it out much later, then you'll surely have benefited from Caleb's having brought real life into an amazing individual who literally saved lives and shaped history. Caleb's perspective also gives us pause for thought in today's world. So join us on social media and here on television as we continue talking about things that truly matter with people like you who truly care.